Here.
And Ms. Silvery.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. And we have to open up for comments. Oh, we do have to do the pledge. It's like, that's a real thing that's happening. Okay. Okay. No, I don't mind waiting. I just, well, we didn't have to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. One's got the turns on today. All right. Are there any comments from the public?
No, thank you.
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the agenda for today's session?
Motion to approve.
I'll second that motion. Mary saying motion carried.
All in favor?
Oh, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, like a motion to approve the minutes on August 11th for the last executive legislative committee meeting.
Madam Chair, I have a question for legal counsel.
Go ahead.
Counsel, thank you. Counselor, since I was not at the August 11th meeting and some say it's okay for me to vote, others say no, since you weren't in attendance, and others will say, well, as long as you have read the minutes, then that's good enough. What's your opinion on this, sir?
So I would say you can abstain. We've got two members here that were on that committee and attending that meeting, and they can approve the minutes. So that's probably cleaner.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so Anne made the motion, and I guess I'm second on the motion. I will abstain.
All those in favor?
All those aye. Aye.
Motion carried.
Abstain.
Okay. All right, discussion and recommendation to RSCVA Board of Directors regarding potential renewal of the employment agreement for Charles Harris. Okay, so today we are going to, with the help of Ben, to help guide us through what the next year will look like up until October 31st on timeline of Mr. Harris's contract. And so I think there's some steps that we have to take, and we wanted to get ahead of it early and make sure that everybody was on the same page so that it's a seamless process this year. So then would you mind giving us kind of those milestones that we have to hit and the dates?
Sure. So just by way of background, so Mr. Harris' existing contract was dated back October 5th, 2020. The term of employment commenced November 16, 2020 and runs through October 31st, 2023. Per that agreement, we are required to commence discussions regarding renewal of that contract no later than May 1 of 2023. And if it's ultimately decided that the contract is not going to be renewed, we've got to give Mr. Harris that notice by July 1, 2023. So we're a couple months ahead. And what we're asking the committee for today, we're not asking for discussion on possible contract terms. It's simply high level. Should this committee recommend to the board of directors that we commence discussions about renewal of Mr. Harris' contract? And if we do, then does this committee have a recommendation of what that process should look like? Typically, in negotiating contracts with the CEO, authority is delegated to a board member to have those discussions on behalf of the board. And then if mutually agreeable terms can be reached, then those terms would go back to the entire board for approval and ratification of the contract. Here, I put together a report, and I apologize, you didn't get it until yesterday. I've sort of identified two alternatives for negotiating the contract, and you may have other thoughts. But I see it as one, you could conduct those proceedings through this committee. So if we decide that we do want to pursue renewal of Mr. Harris's contract, this committee could delegate the authority to have those discussions with Mr. Harris to one of its members. That member would have the discussion with Mr. Harris. If you come to terms, those terms would come back to this committee for sort of review and discussion, and then this committee would make a recommendation to the entire board. The other option is to handle the contract discussions directly at the board level. So that would be a recommendation from this committee to the board that did appoint a board member to have those discussions, and then the contract would just go back to the board. It wouldn't stop back at this committee first.
Madam Chair, I have a question. Just to follow the logic of this. Either this board can decide it has complete authority over the process, or it can decide it wants to give the board full authority.
So
The subcommittee versus the board.
The subcommittee versus.
So this subcommittee can make recommendations to the board. So everything we do here today is going to go back to the board for final regardless. You can propose to the board that this committee handle the contract discussions and bring an approved and recommended contract to the full board, or you can propose to the board handle it.
Okay.
And then we don't bring the contract back to this committee before it goes to the board.
Question, can't the subcommittee make that decision on their own because they're kind of driving that discussion and then make the recommendation to the board? Or is it, does even a decision on how to proceed have to go back to the full
I
board?
guess that's kind of what I was asking. So it sounds like you're only asking us to decide on the process.
Right, today you're deciding, do you want to have those discussions? Are we going to pursue renewing Charles' contract? If that answer is yes, then, right, what process would this committee recommend? But I think that's got to go back to the board. But we want board sign off, right? So we don't want the committee to go down the road, negotiate the contract, go back to the board and have the board say, well, you know, what are we doing here? We think we should have done this differently. Like, let's get agreement at this point on the process to avoid issues in the future.
Okay. Because I think anytime you're discussing a personnel matter with such gravitas, that it should be done in a smaller group rather than a larger group. And I can only imagine what the full board would make of all this. So to the extent that we can decide on the process and make a recommendation to the board with the hope that the board says yes, would be my preference. So that this is not more complicated than it needs to be.
And that's actually what I asked for as we came into this. I talked to the chair and said, I would rather the process come back to the subcommittee as
Yeah.
a lot of the hard work does go to subcommittees to then go and make that recommendation versus honestly opening up for a free fall to the board, which
Well, that could take hours and hours, and I don't understand the purpose of the subcommittee. And we have a finance committee, we have this committee. If all we're doing is saying we recommend renewal, and here's the process. What I understand you saying then is regardless, it could be pulled apart by a full part of the board.
Right, so what we decide here today will be on the agenda for the February board meeting. It will come as a recommendation from this committee of, we're going to pursue negotiations, and here's how we go.
And they can say no.
They can say that.
I'm confident that we'll get support from the board. I've been, you've heard me, I've been an advocate of the subcommittees being more active to be able to condense our large board meetings. But I feel like if the board, at least it was me, if I was not on the subcommittee, I would want to be at least have some comfort knowing that ultimately I'm voting on the major deciding factors, but I don't need to be in the process. And yes, I don't think that it should
Don't
go.
work that way. That would be.
I'm confident.
We'll do our best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the, Madam Chair, if I may, I think the purpose, agreeing with both of you, of the subcommittees is really, whether it's finance, whether it's executive, we also are legislative. We set those subcommittees up for a reason, and it's for them to do more detailed work. And then we are advisory, it's a subcommittee. We make decisions, we go for recommendation in front of the board, whether that gets tweaks a little bit, whether everybody's all on, board with whatever the subcommittees do. The hard work and detailed work falls to the subcommittee. And most of our board members are on a subcommittee, so I think the process for sure. And so we kind of have two things right now. We've got today, we're deciding to start negotiations for a new contract. The process that we want to recommend happen, and then secondarily, once that negotiation happens, whatever the process we decide on, that comes back secondarily to the board following negotiations. So once again, so with the negotiations and what's settled on should come to the subcommittee for review and discussion, and the subcommittee would bring, so there's two things this subcommittee would bring to the board. Is that what we're?
Yeah, and I think that my guess is that the February meeting, even if, yes, they do, before they vote, that to give us authority, they're gonna have lots of questions. So I think we need to discuss at least at a high level on, not necessarily questions on negotiations per se, but like, they might ask, what's in the contract, what are the main terms in the contract? Who's gonna be doing the negotiations? What are the dates that need to be hit? We just have to, or I have to be prepared to speak to that at the board meeting.
And I can put together like a staff memo before the contract that talks about all that.
Perfect.
And I think part of today too, we're doing, so if we're going to recommend to the board that the negotiation be handled at the committee level, then I think the committee would want to propose who they want to serve as a point for those negotiations. And that's something else the board would.
Sure.
The board may say, no, we want a
Was
board
that-
member to do it.
Was that always one? Was that always one person?
So we designate one, and then the one can certainly talk to the others, but we don't want to set up like a subcommittee of the subcommittee, like the committee of two on the subcommittee, so we've always just said.
Just point of information, when this board offered me, when this board voted and then negotiated with me, there was a point person that went through hammering out the contract and agreement to do that, and then what you guys did with that, but I only had one the first time around, just from a historical
But
perspective.
that's not required. I mean, that could be this group.
But,
It could be.
but this group would then be,
Right, then we have to, every time we have a discussion, we have to number it up and have a meeting, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, if you want somebody to be able to have private conversations with Charles,
Sure.
we should designate one. And we've always got to be conscious of walking forum issues. But that point of contact can reach out to other board members and say, here's what we're thinking,
yeah.
do you have thoughts?
Sure.
Can you remind me of the name one date again?
So that's when we have to start. So we're ahead of that. I think we're doing that right now.
Is this considered starting so that we fit that?
I think so. I mean, we've done a good job of getting on this early and making sure we leave ourselves time to deal with it. So I'm not concerned at this point with the deadlines. So, by May 1, we need to be in discussions, and if we're not going to pull the trigger, we need to make that decision by July 1.
Madam Chair, may I
Yes.
ask a couple of questions and potentially make a couple of points? Thank you. I'm uncomfortable with this process. I've been involved in 2 county managers, and I've never been in a scenario where an entire board would abdicate their authority to a smaller board to do negotiations. I would think that Mr. Harris would want to talk to the entire board to talk about all of his achievements and the goals that were set and achieved. I would think that the public process would be better served by allowing the entire board. I'm not personally in favor of any kind of negotiations without everybody being able to voice their opinions from the entire board. This is a 4-member board. It doesn't even make up a quorum of our regular board. So that's my position. I think that this is a very slippery slope. And again, having gone through, and Ms. Bybee, you have done the same thing. You've been involved in appointing city managers. At Tumwa, we had to appoint an executive director. At RTC, we had to appoint an executive director. It was all done by the full board. The county commission, 2 county managers, Mr. Slaughter and Mr. Brown. So, and while I recognize everybody's time is precious, it gives the board the opportunity to talk to Mr. Harris or any applicant for that matter about how they would approach the situation. So that's, and we did this recently with our own county manager about extending his contract. It was our full board. So those are my thoughts. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
Mr. Hartung, I'm not sure of your process at Washoe County, but the city of Sparks, we have to approve the city manager's extension of his contract and the terms. We are not sitting at the table doing the actual negotiation. We're basically handed what has been negotiated. with HR, with the city manager. And it's not, this is the council, and well, the mayor doesn't vote, but the council makes the ultimate decision, just like this board does. But the details of negotiation are no different with our city manager than they are with all of our labor groups. And our assistant city manager has to be the point person, works with the manager, and they decide on the terms of the contract and come to us and basically say yay or nay on this. As you know, we have never, and I've been 8 years in the council, we have never been a part of that actual negotiations and of the terms of the contract itself. And I think the purpose of these subcommittees is to vet out all the information. And you're right, the ultimate decision on renewing the contract and how we want to move that process forward is one issue. Then the actual negotiations in the past have been a point person who would come to this subcommittee. So it's going through a couple of steps, and 4 of us are representative of the board. But at the end of the day, the board does make the ultimate decision. And this also is not, it's not a performance review. It's not what we did in September. This simply is a contract. And I know several entities, you said you negotiated early. I know the airport did. I know that Reno did with their city manager, made the decision to start that process early and to actually come to terms. But I know that my experience with the city is first, the actual terms and negotiation was only for my approval. I was not, didn't have the input there. And I would ask Ms. Silver, who's done a ton of HR through the years, kind of HR best practices. I mean, what do you see in your experience?
Let me mention to Commissioner Hartung, with all due respect, we had a very public vetting of Mr. Harris's performance bonus merit increase some time ago. And that was a very belabored process. And I think for anyone, it's an awkward process, but that's part of the deal. I think if we have listened to what our council has said today, this is really a discussion of the process we want to use. And frankly, having done a lot of employment contracts with senior level officials or executives, the fewer people involved in terms of the actual conversation, it does then go to the full board, which can say yay or nay. But I think to have a public forum with the entire board and have a discussion related to issues we've already discussed, which is the bonus and his accomplishments. I think we went over those in great detail. I think, while I respect your point of view, Commissioner, I think we don't want another 3.5 hour meeting. If I understand from Mr. Kennedy, we're just discussing what's the best process to follow and what recommendation. The board can still say, no, we want all of us involved, but just like Ms. Keel, I don't think they want to.
I think that, and maybe this will give you some comfort. I do not plan, and hopefully all of us agree, we do not plan as a committee to walk into the board meeting where the vote needs to happen with all the terms and have it the first time they're ever hearing of any terms and they're blindsided and they're surprised, because if I was a board member, I wouldn't be too happy about that, because it is a very important topic and there's a lot of opinions and those opinions need to be heard. And so I give my promise that every single board member will be in the loop, will be heard, and will not be surprised on what's being presented. And if anything, they can give their input to me or to any of you for us to discuss at this committee level. It's not like, don't talk to us, we're only going to talk about it here. I welcome their input. They just can't be at the committee meetings. And secondly, I'm obviously I'm in the private sector, so I know I do have a different point of view, but just like the other members, I just feel so, to me, it would be so uncomfortable and so inappropriate to have the full negotiation from start to finish at a board meeting. It does not sit well with me. From a human being standpoint, I just don't think it's appropriate. And, but I have not, maybe they've gone really well in the public sector. I haven't been part of that, so I'm just a little ignorant on that. But in the private sector, that we would never do that. For what it's worth.
Madam Chair, if I may, public sector is very different. We're spending public dollars. There's an expectation by the public that these things don't happen behind closed doors. And while the RSCVA is a slightly different creature, it still is using tax dollars, which are technically public dollars. So, and I don't disagree with you in terms of private sector. It's a different animal. Public sector, and I'm just gonna say that's the nature of this type of a beast, and it's a world that I live in, Miss Bybee lives in, and that's just, I mean, that's the way that we have to do things. With respect to this subcommittee, I mean, I don't even know how I ended up on this subcommittee. I was appointed by, I don't remember being appointed by the board. I don't think it was an action by the board. Who appointed this committee?
I asked you to serve on it. The chair appoints members, either ask for volunteers or appoints people to all the subcommittees.
Okay.
And I asked you if you would serve on this because you were new on the board. We had an opening and you agreed to serve on the subcommittee. The executive is one half of it. Legislative, I knew you had a lot of experience and information to help us for any legislative issues. So I asked you right after you came on the board if you would serve on that. So it's an appointment by the chair, and always has been.
And the legislative portion, I completely understand. I just didn't realize that this was that these negotiations were part of those duties. So forgive my ignorance. Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the time to speak.
Can I, excuse me, Madam Chair, so can I ask you, because I'm really curious on your city manager contracts. So are you saying that the Board of County Commissioners actually vets all the negotiated terms of your manager's contract in a public meeting and go through what that negotiation looks like in a public meeting? Or like ours, you decide on the terms and bring them in a public meeting before the board, but is the process itself of the negotiation happening for your city manager at your board meetings?
Our manager, the county manager, we're given a range of salaries that are commensurate with the position, the number of employees that the manager oversees, what your city manager makes, what the Reno city manager makes, what other city managers would or county managers would make in similar sized areas. If you watch our last meeting where the manager's contract was discussed, then we discussed bonuses during that meeting, extension of contracts. It was all done in public.
Presented the whole package. We're presented the whole package in the city of Sparks. It's not it's not that each council member can say, well, no, I mean, it's obviously you're approving a contract, so anything can be up for discussion. Absolutely. But the actual, pretty much what we're handed is the package, and it's up for discussion, a yay or nay, and details of it are not negotiated, at least at the city of Sparks. So I was just not familiar that the county is doing a little differently than we are. But for me, this, what this process is coming to the full board with the approval, the actual work of negotiation has happened before. And I guess if we're looking at at starting that process, then we need to decide who would be the point person to negotiate directly with Charles. And if we want that point person to come back to this committee, I feel like there should be someone on this committee. My recommendation would be Shannon as chair of this committee, not me necessarily as chair of the board, but I'll open that for discussion for the group.
And I'm happy to, but there's one asterisk that makes it a little bit complicated is I believe my term is up in July. And not that's my second.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
Is it July?
It is July, but is it renewable? That's one thing that I have to.
That's the second.
She's renewed. So you're not, is Andy July 2 or is
And
he
Andy's covered.
December?
And he's not. No.
So,
Again, I think, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I didn't mean to step over you. This is again, why the board, because we do kind of have a scenario whereby we've got members coming on and members coming off. Some members aren't going to be completely up to speed. I believe also Ms. Safraza's seat is termed out. Mr. Kennedy, you can comment on that, but the airport authority will need to appoint another person. So I just and it's just it's a time of flux. As all of you know, I'm new. I would love to hear in public. I was not in the meetings when Mr. Harris went through all of his accomplishments. I mean, I'd love to hear that stuff, and I think it's incumbent. I mean, we're talking about a $400,000+ contract. This is not simple money. This is a very deep issue, and I think Mr. Harris can easily comment on accomplishments and goals that were set and goals that were achieved, and I would think that he would be proud to talk about that.
and I would say that all still happens. I don't think anyone's suggesting that anything be kept out of an official public meeting, out of the public's eye. If I was a board member, I would want to know what the recommendation is from the subcommittee in order to help facilitate my decision and discussion for that matter. So I think, Commissioner, I think that there is a way for you to feel comfortable about this process with kind of a middle stance between the two. I think that, I feel like that maybe the way you're envisioning it is that we say, here you go, we need you to vote. And I agree with you. We should have Charles go through his accomplishments, and we should talk about, we could present the ranges and the DMO survey and the history. All of that, I agree with you, should be presented to the board so that they feel like they're able to make an educated decision. So I agree with you. I just feel like some of the grunt work should start at the subcommittee level, but absolutely, all that information should be presented at a board meeting. I agree.
And let me ask, and I know you kind of touched on this, Mr. Kennedy, but it's been suggested by our DA that even these subcommittees, even being small subcommittees, that they're still subject to the open meeting law. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, absolutely. These committees are subject to open meeting law, there's no question.
We're live right now. Yeah, we're live right now.
No, and I recognize that, but even if we appoint a smaller subcommittee to negotiate with Mr. Harris, is that subject to the open meeting law, Mr. Kennedy?
If we designated 2 individuals, I think it would be.
Okay.
Why don't, suggestion, because I'm coming off, and there is some flux going on. I don't know what happened to Commissioner Harton. Oh, there he is. He's back. Because there's some flux of people coming on and off. What about we do the negotiations all together here? And not with a single person or two.
Madam Chair, to that point, can we not today at least vote to begin the process of contract negotiations in the hope that we're able to extend Mr. Harris's contract? I don't think that issue is in doubt. I don't, at least from my perspective, I don't think there are board members who would vote to give him notice at this point in time or any time in the future. So at least we might accomplish that and put that on the record that this group has voted to begin the process of a contract extension. And then to Commissioner Hartman's point, there is plenty of information he can catch up with, that will be presented. because we've sat at this table for hours discussing your performance. I think this is a legal issue of whether we can begin the process to discuss an extension, which is what I thought I was coming here to do, not to review the contract or not to get into any detail, but just to say yes, rather than giving him notice now or 3 months from now that we're not renewing, let's go forward with a vote to renew and begin the process, because I think we're in the weeds right now in this conversation.
I agree, but we all should be prepared at the February meeting for them to ask all the questions that we just.
I
want it to look like we're kind of all on the same page.
Yes, and that's why the simpler the better. I think this committee needs to make a decision if we want to renew and prepare to enter into negotiations, and can possibly make a recommendation who the point person is. Is that's my understanding of what we were to do.
That's what the agenda is for today. Do we start those discussions and what does that process look like? And we don't have to decide the process. You could go back to the board and say, yes, we decided that we're not going to vote to give a notice, that we want to explore negotiating a new contract, and board, you tell us what that, as a committee, will do it. If the board wants to handle it, the board can handle it. I mean, you can kick that question to the
We
board.
can hear their thoughts.
Or we could recommend that we recommended a point person.
Or you can make a recommendation.
To, or it would be public.
So you can, on the process, you can make a recommendation today to the board, or you can opt not to. That's up to you. But I think at the very least, we should make the decision that, yeah, we want to pursue this moving forward.
And as far as Shannon coming off in July, we don't meet until the last Thursday in July, correct, Charles?
She would come up July 1st. I have to double check the actual timing, so she would be the end of June as Ms. Sparaza would be, and we would have a new person as of July 1st, so she would not be, neither one of the 2 board members that are up for not renewal, but just finishing their term,
Okay.
finishing in June.
I always kind of fan you.
Your comment on that, I know this is a revolving board,
Yeah,
and
it is.
former Commissioner Lucy was very much involved in discussions on merit and bonus when he was due to be off a week later. So I don't think you should decline involvement, or anyone should decline, because we are on when we're on and we're off when we're off. But I think if we're just to hold up everything, we're never going to catch up, because people.
Well, and I would hope, my hope would be negotiating, if we make you the point person, because you're chair of this committee, of this subcommittee right now. And you're not coming off till July 1st. You know, in an ideal world, all of that work, which is why we're starting early, so that we have an opportunity, not feel pressured for time, for everyone, for us, for Charles, for the rest of the board. Starting that negotiating, if we make you the point person, starting that negotiations now. So, you know, by the time that would be completed and with us meeting monthly, the process, and we could, the terms could be decided upon and voted upon at any time, correct? And they could be effective if we came to terms and then Shannon's leaving. If the board, can the board approve it before she's gone? Could they approve it with a start date of October? Kind of give me options there. If we finish the negotiations, is it at that date, or we determine what the date is of the start of the new contract? If it's, you know, less than, you know, before October 31st, we can set that date.
Sure, so it's what the parties agree to. So if the
Okay.
board as a whole and Mr. Harris as a whole agree that we want to sign this contract, get a new contract, make it effective in June, and run it through whatever that extension period is, we can do that. Like, we're not hamstrung. We don't have to wait until this current agreement expires to enter a new one. We can sign one whenever we're ready and everybody's in agreement.
Mr. Kennedy, or Madam Chair, rather. You know, so question, since this is not a majority of our board, this is a 4-person board and is not a full majority of the 9-person board. Can we make the decision now, or is it just a recommendation to take to the full board? Because as I read the potential motion is to recommend negotiations be handled at the committee level, recommendation, keyword, Potential motion, recommendation, negotiations be handled at the full board level. These are recommendations to the full board. Am I correct?
Correct. So all RSCVA subcommittees are advisory only. So they have no authority to bind the organization. Everything's got to go back to the full board.
Understood. Okay, thank you. You've answered my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
What about, what about Mr. Hartung being the point person with me, because he's gonna be here? Why does it have to be one? Can it be two? I mean, obviously he has to agree, but.
Right. So we got to be conscious of, are we forming a subcommittee of a
Two
subcommittee?
people.
But two people, you can put yourself in a position where you gotta notice a meeting to be able to sit down. Because we're giving two people the authority versus if we give one person, they can have those discussions, but we can't have an
Could you say
official
one to two
two-person.
people, 1 to 2, because then when I come off, if there's lingering, again, we're still bringing it back to this. I mean, I'd like to know what the actual law states that we can't have 1 to 2 people talk with him.
So you can have one, I think two creates another.
You think, or
I haven't done the research of whether, but if you have a committee.
Mhm.
And the committee appoints two people to go do a certain task, that's a subcommittee. And if you have two people on a subcommittee. And when those two people meet to talk about committee business, it's an open meeting.
Well, I'm just thinking that if I'm not available and he is, or he's not available where I mean, it could, and sometimes it's as simple as I'm picking up the phone talking to Charles, and maybe next week, Commissioner Hartung is picking up the phone talking to Charles. It's not like we're always
I'm
like.
never going to talk to him. I just want to make sure that I've been quiet, I've stayed quiet, the Commissioner Hartung or anyone in this board, I'm happy to pick up the phone off to anybody, they. Just want to make sure that that's on.
You see what I'm saying? Like, it's not always like the two of us are meeting, it's just like that there's two options.
So I think the subcommittee needs to make a recommendation to appoint one point person.
Okay.
And if you want to have a sounding board or a right-hand person that you're just in discussions with, that's okay, but you are the person that's tasked ultimately with bringing something back to the committee.
So we don't have to make a motion that includes that second point person, that could be at the chair's discretion.
I think that's just natural, right? If you're assigned this task, you're going to talk to other board members, conscious of a walking forum, and we can talk about that off the record. But being conscious of a walking forum, yes, you're gonna want that person to get input from other committee members, board members, et cetera. That's fine. But we don't want to officially designate.
Well, then you're coming back at the end of the day, Shannon, you're the point person. You're still coming back to this subcommittee,
Of course.
who that's the subcommittee, and then takes our recommendation.
I'm just thinking, if I'm coming on, I'm just trying to make sure there's a seamless, but I mean, it doesn't mean that this committee can't appoint somebody else when I'm there.
Well, that would be my responsibility to look at, I'll have two positions. With two board members coming off, I have to fill just like this fall when we knew we were losing, subcommittee, or we were losing board members. And I had subcommittee openings, I had to make appointments to those open spots. Is just a regular course of business. So somebody will come back on, I'll have to make another appointment to this subcommittee, and to my special events subcommittee, when board members come off in July. And that's just the normal course of business, but I think my recommendation would be to move forward with contract negotiations, to designate our chair of this subcommittee, Shannon Keel, to begin negotiations with Charles, and then to do, to come back to this subcommittee who will make the final recommendation. We're gonna come to the board for just this motion today, but then the actual negotiations are our second step. And that we've got some time for that process to that out, but it would come to this subcommittee and then to the board for their approval and discussion.
I just have a comment and perhaps it's a question. At no time do I recall as a board member being consulted about Mr. Harris's contract. So I admit my memory is failing from over 2 years ago. I don't know what's in the contract. I never saw the contract. So I think to Shannon's point earlier, Chair Keel's point, we're talking about someone's livelihood here. And I think the CEO deserves the respect of this committee at this point in time to at least make a motion, and I'm making a motion, that we vote to recommend renewal of Mr. Harris's contract and recommend that our committee chair, Shannon Keel, begin the process of conversing with Mr. Harris, A, to find out if he wishes to pursue contract renewal, and B, to determine what that conversation will include. We will go to the board and ask them to approve that recommendation. And then we'll come back together again as a committee. But otherwise, I don't understand the purpose of this committee. I mean, I think we've already discussed and Chair Keel has mentioned, you know, the awkwardness that accompanies public meetings, particularly when it's a personnel matter. And yet we understand open meeting law, and we understand that in Commissioner Vaughn's case, it's very public at the county level, it's quasi-public at the city level. I don't recall any council meeting in Reno that discussed major increase for the city manager. So I think we're a little all over the place, but I think today we're here to determine whether we would like to renew the contract and make that recommendation to the board. If the board majority says we don't wish to renew, then we're on a completely different road. But at least if there's a vote of a board to renew based on our recommendation, we can get ahead of the process, as you said, and have Ms. Gill present for that. I am not concerned at all that Ms. Gill would be, as chair, involved, even if she's getting off, any more than I was with Commissioner Lucy making key decisions a week before he was out of office. So I think we just move forward. And my motion is to approve discussions regarding, I'm making a motion to renew Mr. Harris's contract. No details involved in that, but that we are taking a recommendation to the board to begin the process of renewing the contract.
Process to renew.
The process of renewing the contract. I'm not discussing I haven't made a motion about any details. Just motioning that we go to the board with a recommendation that we begin the process of renewing the contract. End of motion.
With our chair.
With our chair as the point person.
Subchairs.
Subcommittee chair.
What's the committee?
Yeah, which chair?
This is the chair, this is the chair sub.
But it isn't a subcommittee.
That's committee.
Not a subcommittee or a committee. So it's, as I read, as I stated it.
So to make Lisa's life a little bit.
Yes, I agree. Yes, it is.
So we got a proposed motion in the materials that say precisely that. So it's broken out into two motions. So I think the first part is moving that the executive legislative committee recommends to the full RSCVA board of directors that the RSCVA should commence discussions with Mr. Harris, RSCVA president CEO, in an attempt to extend the term of Mr. Harris's employment agreement. So I think that's the first motion. So maybe we act on that one and then we'll take another one on the process.
I will second that motion. Is that your motion?
That is
Ms. Silver, okay, I will second that motion.
All in favor?
We'll ask for discussion.
Oh, sorry, discussion.
No, I think, if you're asking for my opinion, I think that, you know, that making a recommendation to the board is fine. We're not at the point where we're talking about salaries or bonuses or any of those kinds of things. All we're saying is that we're willing to open up negotiations. And so I'll be supportive of that piece of the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
There's a second.
Yes, but now if I can do the second piece, which I think is what Ms. Silver's, what the idea is a motion that the executive and legislative committee recommend the full RSCVA board of directors that the executive and legislative committee through Ms. Shannon Keel work with Mr. Harris and attempt to negotiate mutually agreeable terms to extend the terms of Mr. Harris's employment agreement. If the designated point of contact and Mr. Harris reach agreeable terms, the proposed contract terms will be brought back to the executive and legislative committee for review and a possible recommendation to the full RSCVA board of directors for approval.
I will make a motion.
Oh, second.
Discussion?
Should I give you my condolences or congratulations, Miss Keel? It's a lot of work. It's like being elected. People will
She
call me
runs
up and say,
It's her, she runs the GSR, I think she's probably a piece of cake. compared to someone else.
it's not a question of whether she's capable, it's a question of time.
Okay, all in favor?
I,
I,
Motion carries unanimously. On to the next agenda item.
Announcements. Reports and updates. Okay, since this is my first one, I don't have it. That we read here about, so the executive, I'm sorry, the legislative branch, if you will, of this committee. Chair Biden, would you mind giving kind of an update on like what, like in future committee, like kind of where we're at with that process and if we need to be involved right now at committee level with any legislative items?
And my good would come in there as Mr. Legal Counsel.
Yeah, I think it's fine. It's for the information.
It's point of information, it's not really discussion or voting on anything right now. And I think we do have a legislative as the second half of this. And really, for this committee, we had our presentation at our regular board meeting last week for from our lobbyist, and he is going to be working directly with Charles. And obviously I'll be in the loop too, as the legislature starts. And Ms. Silver will be down there every day, eyes and ears also. So really, as at this point, we will be ready to, issues come forward that he feels, you know, through our CEO, that need to come to this committee. I think we're on hold. We're on hold, for what the lobbyist is watching, or any of us find legislative issues that we want to track, we want to comment on, we want to bring to this subcommittee for consideration, is yet to happen. So,
And if I
Mr. Kennedy.
can, yeah, I can add a little bit to that, just historically, sort of how the activity's been handled. So, you know, lobbyist reports to the full board. Some sessions, there are bills that are 100% RSCVA issues. The new surcharge and the master plan was one. Decreasing our board size from 13 to 9 was one. So those types of issues that really are sort of organically involved in the RSCVA have typically come to the committee for a discussion and then to the board. But issues that are sort of tangentially related, like change to the open meeting laws or things that sort of that impact all public agencies, typically haven't come to this committee level. So it's usually those issues that are.
And if I can weigh in, Mr. Blair, the consultant actually reports to the CEO that goes into the board. And so, the consultant and I have a meeting. We will continue to meet every month throughout the whole session to see what then develops that would require us to meet on that portion of this subcommittee. And if there's anything that changes or potentially impacts the RSCVA, I will come back and talk to the chair and ask that we reconvene this part of the committee so that we can then discuss that. So I'm in constant contact, not the email blast, but the effort to be able to talk to him all the time, make sure that nothing's affecting our organization.
And so it's not automatic that this committee is meeting during this section. It's if there bills come up that are specific to the RSCVA, then the decision will be made to whether or not bring it to this committee.
But I would say that every time we meet, could we not have just an open item to, okay, any updates on the legislators?
Yeah, and I'm happy to update the entire subcommittee as we go through session to see if there's anything that develops. Again, one of the things that I've worked very hard to do is to make sure that this, not only this committee, but the entire board is up to date on everything with our business, and I asked Mr. Wadums for every CEO report to make sure if there's anything that does affect, that goes in the CEO report, so there's no surprises. So within a couple of weeks, we will always know that, and if anything requires that we bring to the committee, then we'll address that.
I am curious on the open meeting law change bill. There's a bill to change something for open meeting law.
I don't know,
Okay, I heard that as well.
I'm on a regular weekly call with Mr. Robbins, our legislative affairs representative. It's weekly, it's review of every bill draft request, there are over 1,000. And there is one that I think actually helps in terms of a little relaxation of open meeting law. Whether it becomes a full bill, but I'm sure Jesse will update us on
Excited to
that.
hear about
And I'll
that.
ask him about that.
Okay, and I believe at our last board meeting, a board member asked, Mr. Wadums for a matrix, I believe, with the different items that were on there.
Yeah, he's looking at
that's part
that.
of
That's
it.
part of it as well.
Okay, and then you will send that.
I
out
will
to
submit
the-
that to the entire.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, Madam Chair, to have a tracking matrix. Every other board and commission I serve on, including the county commission, has a matrix of bills that we're tracking. And to your point, Mr. Kennedy, potential bills, because sometimes it doesn't seem like it's affecting us, but it can affect us.
And I have a recommendation or a suggestion, and Stephen and I were talking about this after the last meeting. Sometimes information can get lost on important topics within the RSCVA because it's part of the big packet that you send out, and I appreciate all the information. But when we, like 6 months later, a year later, when we're trying to go back and search for whatever topic, we can't find it because we have to think about what month that was in that particular packet. So this would be, I think, a great example, and this is just a suggestion, it's up to you, that when that information, like the matrix, goes out, that it goes out as its own individual email with that header, as opposed to buried in a board packet, because then it's just easier for, at least for me.
Great. Thank you.
Then as far as, next meeting for this subcommittee, do we, how do we determine, well, this has to go to the next board meeting, so obviously it won't be till after our February board meeting, that we move forward on this, so it's really at the discretion of the chair, Chair Keel, when you feel that this subcommittee needs to meet again, if this passes at the full board, then she would be, authorized or able to start that negotiation process. So will we just leave time uncertain to be determined on the next committee meeting? Chair Keel, do you? Look at your
It
calendar
might be
and-
safe for, I can set out some dates to the committee, but I think maybe March would probably be appropriate.
I have a question, Madam Chair, really to Mr. Kennedy. I just want to make sure that at the next board meeting, it is only the two motions we've approved that go to the board. We do not end up in conversation regarding terms and conditions. Is that correct?
Correct, we're not talking salary, we're talking, we will put this to the board. I mean, the board may want to discuss this process and come up with a different one. But assuming that they approve what's been recommended here,
Okay.
then Ms. Keel will start discussions and we'll meet back once she has something to report.
I guess I'm just questioning my own head what the virtue of committees is if in fact whatever we're doing here today would be just overturned. To Mr. Carpenter's point, Commissioner, they could say, no, we want a completely different process or we don't want to renew the contract. I mean, all of that is potential.
Right, I think the idea is hopefully we give them a nice tidy package that they can just say, the committee's done the work, that sounds good, and move on, but
Okay.
it doesn't always happen that way, and it's within the board's purview to change them.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
But
Or no? Oh, comments from, more comments.
Should I put it on the record? that-
Comments from the board by the public.
Not at this time, thank you. Yeah,
motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Thank you.
And we don't have to vote on it. Okay. You just get get the ballot, and you're sure, there you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman.
Okay, Kirk out.
Thank you. Feel better,